Good day, mates and fellow adventurers. My name is Mordecai. Welcome back to this remote research facility from which I narrate various RPG horror stories for considerations for the table. One of the biggest potential obstacles that can be encountered at the table are problem players, people who cause issues for a wide variety of means. Sometimes it's that guy who wants to usurp the authority of the Dungeon Master by actively combating them through power gaming or wanting to win at a cooperative tabletop game by beating the Dungeon Master. Or it can be a player who is genuinely unaware that they are causing problems for the others at the table, and simply needs help and guidance in order to become a fantastic player that ensures everyone has fun over the course of the campaign. Regardless of which category the problem player falls into, the problems that they can cause can provide a good opportunity to improve as a dungeon master and as a player. And these improvements can vary from becoming better at improvising escapes once a problem has cropped up, or being able to resolve the issues out of game with the problem player. However, another variation on these methods is asking around for advice on what to do after the problem has made its presence known to the group. So let's delve into today's story and see if we can figure out what could be done to resolve similar issues to those presented. Before we begin with the story, if you like my content and want to help support the channel, be sure to subscribe and maybe give the video a like. Every bit of support is highly appreciated, and it's free to do. Thank you sincerely, and with that, we shall get on to reading the story. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Today's narrative is titled Player Burns Friendships Over Full Plate, and is written by user Howling Comet. I should preface this by saying I was the DM, and while I don't think I am the greatest, I at least try my best when it comes to making a decent experience. This was one situation I can't really get out of my head, and I thought maybe sharing it would help. The campaign was a homebrew setting I had made for beginners. It had a well-defined path and incorporated visions by the gods to lead players on their way if they got lost. The game itself was set in a kingdom beset by 4 issues on 4 sides, and players were to go around to each one and resolve the problems, as heroes tend to do. The problem player in question was a bit abrasive in personality, but I had known him for nearly 3 years and knew how to deal with him most of the time, and he was interested in playing, so I offered for him to join so I could teach him. I am forever lacking players with a time schedule that lines up with my own. He was playing a lizardfolk fighter, which I encouraged him to play like the lizardfolk is described. He wasn't perfect, but I appreciate that he at least tried. The other 2 members of the party were not always there. The only one who was persistent was the rogue, which is someone I feel bad for because every game I try to run with him fails due to others not attending. There was a sorcerer who only showed up for the first session, and a wizard who joined the party after session 3. To bring everything up to speed, the party had just travelled through the mountains to find and kill a dragon who was sending kobold raids down onto the farms and villages. The party found the wizard, and a magic sword that was used to deal a lot of damage to the dragon, but exploded when the dragon died, and that resulted in the party leveling up to level 3. Their adventure back was easier now that they knew the path. There was a bit of an issue with me describing the scenery and paths that could be taken should they want to go a different way. There was also a bit of an argument between me, the fighter, and the wizard about needing a map in order to head back, but I did my best to clarify, and they just ended up going back the same way that they came. It ended a bit rough in my opinion. I admit it was my fault. This event combined with a few times he tried to intimidate some of the kobolds into being his servants, as he was now the big, scary lizard in the room, and I denied him, openly stating that I didn't want to manage it and didn't think it was reasonable, and that was probably angering him and building up that anger slowly. Once back in the kingdom's central city, it was described as mostly populated by dwarves, elves, and humans. The wizard wanted to go to the library to learn about the sword that exploded, and the fighter wanted to go to the blacksmith. The library was run by a snooty elf, and the blacksmith was run by a smug dwarf, switching between the two scenes occasionally so I could keep the players interested as best as I could. The rogue decided to go with the wizard, and the fighter was left by himself at the blacksmith's. This brings us to the incident. The dwarf was already described as being busy working on weapons, which could have been assumed was intended for the kingdom's army, as in the conversation it was said that the dwarven blacksmith had a deal as the main supplier of the kingdom as long as he gave them reduced prices. The fighter wanted to buy full plate with his gold, offering his old chainmail, which I valued at about 75% of its original price because it was a bit conditioned, some miscellaneous stuff in his inventory, and then he haggled with a good roll and I gave him a further 20% discount. All that, and he unfortunately still didn't have enough to buy the full plate, which is fine because he still had the option of buying something cheaper. However, he started demanding that he be allowed to buy it, both in and out of character. I was a bit surprised he didn't just try to buy something else, and the other players were already telling him he was being unreasonable and were trying to convince him to buy something cheaper. He started ranting about his good roll meaning he should be able to buy the armor he wants. I told him repeatedly that just because he rolls well doesn't mean he'll always get what he wants, and he is welcome to buy something else. Instead, he leaves the blacksmith's shop after insulting his craftsmanship, making the dwarf unwilling to work with him, and goes to the town square outside to begin preaching about how the dwarf is a rather special kind of jerk who doesn't sell at fair prices and has poor craftsmanship. Most of the townspeople are ignoring him, and the guards are too busy defending the Outer Kingdom, but eventually he gets the attention of a bunch of local dwarves who tell him to cut it out, as the blacksmith is family, and they aren't afraid to jump someone for besmirching his name and craftsmanship. After continuing to escalate and threatening those dwarves as well, I try to de-escalate by having one of them knock him out with a whack to the back of his head. I didn't let him have a saving throw because I felt it would have just gotten worse if he had rolled well on that saving throw. I tried switching to the two at the library to let him cool off, but he just continued to argue about how it was unfair he couldn't buy the full plate with what he had and the roll he got. I was pretty checked out at that point, and the other two players ended up trying to tell him how games have a reasonable amount of believability in them, and that if I want to keep the prices consistent to keep immersion, I have every right to do so. The fighter also tried to argue about the knockout with no save being BS, and while I can't say it wasn't at least a little bit, the players also argued if you're surrounded by people, it's pretty easy for one to get the jump on you and do such a thing. He ended up leaving, and I let the other two talk to the librarian and the blacksmith about the sword they found before ending that session. I wasn't going to give him any consequences other than having him wake up in an alleyway with some bruises from being roughly dragged around, but it still really bothers me. He ended up leaving the server we were playing in and blocking all three of us after posting a long rant about how my preventing his good rolls from doing anything was BS and I was a terrible DM for doing that to him, going on a full paragraph about him rolling a nat 20 to intimidate a kobold and it somehow not making a kobold his underling. The other two players assured me they understood I was trying to help a bad situation and that they didn't really mind, but the event really ruined my motivation for running the rest of it, even if I still had the two players. There goes another game, I suppose. I am at least glad the other new player wasn't put off tabletop role-playing by this one player. And since I am still a little new to DMing, I thought maybe some input outside of those two players would be useful. Did I go too far? Could I have done something better? I probably could, at least that's what I feel. Was I the jerk and all that? And that's where the story ends. Yeah, it's pretty clear that the problem player was out of line on multiple occasions. The first instance of a problem that was that the problem player believed that intimidation and persuasion are forms of expressly mind control. In reality, this could not be further from the truth. And because of that, the problem player was doomed to never really succeed in getting the kobold as a minion, especially with a new word dungeon master running the game. The second instance of a problem being caused is believing that they should have been able to purchase their precious full plate body armor, and not being willing to compromise with a slightly less effective but far more affordable set of armor. Before deciding to blame the DM for being unreasonable out of game, and having their character in-game proceed to try and wreck the dwarf's life. Obviously, the problem player also has a bit of a temper when they don't have the story go their way, which is out of character for the lizard folk in the default D&D lore, as they are not supposed to be driven by emotions such as anger or sadness, which is rather contrary to how the DM asks the problem player to roleplay them. This is also on top of the claim that the dwarf was a rather special kind of jerk. Put together, this indicates the possibility that the problem player wanted to become some sort of main character, which could have spelled disaster for the campaign if it was allowed to progress further. Speaking of the Dungeon Master, they are sadly not without fault. The most egregious instance where the Dungeon Master acted improperly was with regards to how they had the problem player's character knocked out without a saving throw. You could always have had the dwarves attempt to restrain the character and actually call over some guards to arrest him. That would have been preferable to not allowing him to make a saving throw against getting knocked out. The instant that the player perceived a railroad through that, there was an even bigger problem. I would not say that the Dungeon Master was a jerk, but I will say that this is an opportunity to learn how to properly handle problem players like this in the future. Let's take a step back and talk about escapes to resolve issues in-game and out-of-game. One of the best escapes to resolve issues is to communicate with the problem player between sessions in order to figure out in-game solutions going forward. Like explaining to him why it was unreasonable for a kobold to become his willing minion after he attempted mind control through intimidation. Another possible solution could be to have the dwarf ask him why he so badly wanted to purchase the full plate, maybe even improvise a possible favour for the lizard folk to undertake in order to lower the cost of the full plate so he could afford it. And if the problem player continues to make more problems, it may be worth kicking them from the game. And these are some of the considerations that can be taken away from this story for players to learn from. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thank you for watching, and I shall see you all next time.